Hey, everybody, it's time to get bats in the belfry of our broken brain. That's right, it is Batman Day coming up this Saturday, and this is the first part of a two-part episode where my brother Christian and I, that is Dwight, talk about some of the diagnostic and mental health influences of Batman, particularly Batman villains, particularly when we talk about that instead of other things that we go off on. So this is one of the new materials here for Batman Week, Batman Month. We're hitting some things on Batman. If you want to know more about particular appropriate diagnoses for Batman's Rogues Gallery, then you definitely want to tune in to the short videos I'm posting over on Instagram at Brainiacs Ahoy, just as one word, at Brainiacs Ahoy, where I'm doing a fun little exercise where I'm imagining what would it be like if I were an intern at Arkham Asylum doing some diagnosis and treatment planning. So the information about diagnosis, how we get there, and what kind of treatment planning decisions we make, that's all super real. It's just about, Professor Pig or Poison Ivy or Dr. Fate or, no, Hugo Strange. Dr. Fate's not a villain. Anyway, we won't fix that. I just want you to know I'm a real person like you. So hop on over to Instagram to see those. And I hope you enjoy my brother and me rambling on and talking about whether or not the Batman villains are mentally ill, whether or not that's the context for their behavior and their naughtiness or, stuff like that.
The Broken Brain.
Recording in progress.
We'd actually need a full minute of room tone. It's just, a few seconds. Can you imagine? We're going to sit here for a full minute. They actually do that in professional settings, I think.
Yeah.
Probably
before they bring the talent out.
You ever see, sometimes not. Sometimes they get everyone situated and then they sit. And there's a
because the ambient noise is affected.
Yeah, just by people being there. And so they will do this. There was a video as a YouTube video. I'll post a link in the notes if I remember to do so. The earlier in the podcast someone says they will do that, I found it correlates pretty closely with how likely they are to forget to actually do that. So,
right.
But if I do, anybody can probably Google it on YouTube. There's a video called Room Tone, and it's like several minutes of these clips of just celebrities sitting, waiting for an interview to start. And they're just kind of like, sitting there, like just kind of not looking at each other because they just all have to be quiet for a minute. And anyway, it's fun, especially if you do any kind of audio engineering. I shared it in a podcasters group and it killed. Whoa. Anyway, that's a little.
I saw someone's YouTube video the other day where they had edited it wrong, and because they do this little voice for their dog. And so often it will cut to the dog and he does this little voice for the dog, right?
Yeah.
But he edited it wrong. And so he's like not looking at the camera and he's like reaching up to already like turn the camera off. And he's doing the dog's voice and for the dog segment instead of cutting to the dog. He accidentally included the footage of him recording the dog's voice. I was like, that sucked.
I will say my opinion, my experience with that kind of thing is that comes from being too good of an editor, in that you start to trust yourself that the little notes you make during the recording are 100% accurate. And so you don't go back through and listen. You just go, well, I made 3 little notes and I know roughly where those are. I'll just fix them and I'm sure everything will be fine. I'm sure I didn't forget to write down any other thing, or I'm definitely not going to sit down and listen to it in its entirety. I got to get this out this afternoon. And then next thing you know, it's like, hey, how come this only goes for 23 minutes and then stops mid-sentence? Oh, thanks for the feedback. Anyway.
Whoops.
I've certainly never happened to me. I think I'd been doing podcasting for a while when I read someone saying, it takes at least as long as it takes at least an hour to 2 hours for 1 hour of audio or something like that. And I was like, it does? Maybe I'm being more lazy than I should be. Yeah. Anyway, that'll be a surprise to anyone who's listening to the crisp, clear quality of today's episode of The Broken Brain.
Oh, yeah.
We're talking about Batman, as we've never done before on this program. But I think one thing that haven't done before is officially have an episode themed around Batman where my brother Christian and I talk about Batman. That's a lot of qualifiers.
Hello.
But I just can't guarantee that we haven't talked about Batman at all when you've been on. But I think it's the first time we've done it on purpose.
I think we talked about Christmas specials last time, so I doubt Batman came up.
We didn't have a Batman Christmas special, huh? You know? Oh, well. Santa's a character in the Marvel universe, but I don't know if he is in DC.
Batman the Animated Series has a couple episodes that are, and I think his parents were killed on Christmas Eve in that show.
Oh,
I don't know.
It's not always Christmas Eve, I don't think, but
I don't think so. But in that show, I remember snow at least, and usually when there's snow in a cartoon show, it means it's Christmas.
Or in Russia. If you're not in Russia, it's Christmas. That's it. The way you can tell is just look over the shoulder of any shot, and if the Kremlin is there, then it's Russia, and if not, then it's snowing. It must be Christmas.
There's usually also like a old-timey Santa ringing a bell, like Salvation Army
right.
Santa.
Salvation Army Santa.
In the background or something. But
and
especially the style of that show.
Nailing boards to the bottom of a tree in order to take it home. Two small planks on the bottom of the tree.
Because that's how people stand up Christmas trees.
Right.
But by the way, since we're talking about Batman, that show, Batman the Animated Series, and I know it would come up eventually, so I'm just
of course, why not? I mean,
head on.
Yeah.
That show is a masterpiece. There aren't a lot of cartoons.
Yeah.
It's one of the best cartoons ever made, for sure. And it's and Kevin Conroy's Batman is certainly, I don't know, he's still my favorite Batman, frankly.
He's one of the classic Batmans, for sure. I mean, as far as you look at it, and he's one that I see it now online. It's in vogue for people to know stuff because of the availability of information, which is a nice trend. But I've seen more in the last couple of years when people do the which one is the best Batman? Which I will tell you, if you belong to any fandom Batman groups on Facebook, you definitely won't get tired of the 300 to 400 of those posts every week,
right?
Where someone's like, "Hey, I hate Ben Affleck," or "I hate Christian Bale," or "I hate whichever one someone didn't say recently enough," and we can all fight about it. So anyway, as people are fighting about their favorite Batman, Kevin Conroy now I notice comes up more often where people are like, oh yeah, don't forget Kevin Conroy. Whereas it used to be nobody ever thought about the animated series, you know?
Well, and he obviously is a voice actor. So doing the voice is something that a lot of actors have struggled with. And because he could do the Bruce Wayne voice and the Batman voice, and neither of them sounded silly.
That's
I think that's really hard for a lot of actors who don't do voice acting.
Mm-hmm.
Or, you know, like Ben Affleck. I don't really have a problem with his Batman performance, really, but he always plays a version of Ben Affleck. He's not really he's not a method actor for sure. He doesn't get into character a lot. And so I think that kind of acting is new to a lot of people.
That's right. It's a really good point.
And Christian Bale gets a lot of crap about the Batman voice that he did, and it was a little over the top. But at least he did something.
Which
honestly,
and it's funny because people don't realize that, of course, comics, you just have it in your head. However, there's multiple times where I've read a Batman comic where there's been a reference to, oh no, you're not doing the voice, or something like that. There is a reference to the fact that Bruce Wayne does obfuscate his voice as he is Batman.
Well, they would have to, right?
Does he? Or is Bruce Wayne the real mask? Anyway, so which is his real voice?
Is something else I liked about Kevin Conroy's performance. If you notice when he's Bruce Wayne, but he's with Alfred, he talks in the Batman voice because that's his real personality. But when he's at social events or whatever, he does that Bruce Wayne voice.
Kind of a little bit of this, exactly. No,
yeah,
as bad as I just did. No. It's not like
no. We could go on about this for days. We could do our best Batman impressions, like. Where were the other drugs going?
Swear to me.
Swear to me.
Yeah, I can't do a real close one, but no, the thing that I do appreciate that about Bale. It's funny that The Dark Knight is one of my favorite movies, probably just favorite movies.
Oh, absolutely.
But I do, and it's funny though, his vocal fry that he does for the voice for that. I find that I almost though. I don't mind it really myself. But if I'm watching it, I almost feel like if anyone is in the vicinity, they're going to say something like, "Oh, his voice." If it's not one of like my immediate family or someone who wouldn't dare to profane the movie The Dark Knight because we all like it so much.
Yeah.
No, but it is interesting though because you wouldn't want to be like, "Hey, it's me, most famous guy in the city who just reappeared."
Right.
6
I'm
months
really
ago.
scary.
I just want to sound.
Am
like
I
me.
scaring you yet?
I'm
hanging
exactly
you
right.
off a
There's the
rooftop.
intimidation part too, because he's supposed to be not quite. I think the thing where it didn't serve him well, and I've done this before when you're doing things that are theatrical, or you're doing things where it's like, okay, I've picked an aspect to a character, or I'm doing a bit, and now I have to do a paragraph long monologue. And I didn't think about the Batman voice. Now, I haven't done specifically that, but you do something. And you're like, if I say more than one sentence, it doesn't sound like I planned on. Yeah,
right. In the first film, he had that Batman mystery, and it kept him really separated from other characters, and he never had to talk much.
Yeah.
And then, they gave him some speeches in the other two movies, and that's hard when you got to do the Batman voice in
exactly,
for a speech.
It's like you can't all of a sudden stop doing it. It's not going to work.
And he's talking to the Joker when he's hanging him off the roof in that scene,
Yeah.
And or when the Joker's hanging upside down, which is an amazing scene, by the way. But and you could tell that Christian Bale is like out of breath when he's doing that speech because
that's the one I was thinking of.
So much. Yeah, right, exactly.
People just prove to you.
Right, exactly.
And he's trying to do the voice at the same time. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But I find with intimidation and fear factor, right? Because he's trying to be intimidating, and the voice aspect of it, you either have to be super gruff and scary like that, or the complete opposite. I don't know if you remember the show The Mentalist and the main serial killer in that show.
I didn't really get into it.
Long time ago.
Yeah.
But the main serial killer, Red John, had this voice like this. And it was like super creepy because
more counterintuitive creepiness.
Yeah. Right, exactly. So I think you got to go one extreme or the other. But
yeah, I think that makes sense. Well, and it also too, I think that one thing we suffer from in our culture, and it's a weird problem, but is exposure to things. I can watch my favorite movie 100 million times, and the 9th or 10th time that I'm hearing someone do a voice that is a little goofy for purposes of the character, I might forget that they're not portraying a person who is making movies. They're portraying a person who's dangling a dirty cop by his ankle over an alleyway. And that guy would be scared of that voice in that moment.
Yeah.
Right. It's like,
exactly.
It's not like, oh, I've watched this all the time and it always sounds like this. Well, yeah, it's a it's a fixed thing.
Especially
always sound like
if you they didn't know who Batman was. He's like, it's not like
that's not the best Batman voice. I would do it different.
In that world, there are no Batman comics, so it's like that it would be extra scary. This guy in a mask is like all of a sudden going to throw you off a roof. So
yeah, and you wouldn't even think like, oh, well, I think he was trying to mask his voice. Duh, he's wearing a mask. Anyway, but so kind of funny.
But transition.
Yes.
One of the best things about the cartoon, the animated series, is that they could feature all the Rogues Gallery.
Yes.
Because they didn't have to worry about the budget and all that for costumes and blah, 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 blah. So you could have Villain of the Week, and you actually got to see all the villains from the comics that you really love, which were all exceptionally performed. I mean, especially Mark Hamill, but, all of them. And Mark Hamill's not a Batman villain, but he plays the Joker. For those of you who don't know,
that hit me
But-
just for a second. I was like, wow, that'd be
But-
awesome if Mark Hamill was actually a villain in the Rogues
Himself,
Gallery for
yeah,
Batman.
right.
All he does
But,
now is Batman tries to stop him from talking trash on the Luke Skywalker's portrayal in the sequel trilogy.
Exactly.
Oh wait, no, don't
But-
stop him.
So no. But not only do you get all of your favorites, but they even created some new ones for that show because they had used so many villains so many times, and some of those became comic book favorites eventually.
Sure.
So
I mean, Harley Quinn,
think
of course,
that's pretty
is
cool.
the-
Well,
and Phantasm,
yeah.
I think, are the two that come to my mind.
yeah, and my favorite, the Clock King.
Yes,
But-
the Clock King. I was just thinking about him the other day because I was like, it's like somebody was like, "Oh, I remember Calendar Man. Let's do something cool." That's
Right,
something
exactly.
tangentially related to that character, but cooler than him.
But one of the things I loved about, and we're going to get into their psyche, I think, eventually,
Yeah,
some of
yeah.
these villains. But one of the things I loved about the Clock King and that show in general was that it was always some trauma that was tangentially related to their secret or their persona as a villain
right.
that made them evil. And then, like the Clock King, it was something about he was late for a job interview or something, and then and he missed his train, so he became obsessed with time, and then he became the Clock King, and he went absolutely insane and psychotic because he missed this job interview. But
That's well, I mean, when you're creating secondary and tertiary rogue gallery characters, but at some point you run out of real, I guess, relatable trauma to the point where it's like he didn't get that job.
right. Or even the Joker, where it's like he was a perfectly normal gangster. I think he had some sociopathy, but he was just like this normal guy, and then he fell into a vat of acid, and all of a sudden he became like deranged in a totally different way. But
It's an interesting look at it. This was really the genesis of this. The idea of this today is looking at the mental illness and the role that plays, particularly in the Rogues Gallery. Although I did a whole episode a while back with Sharon Blady, who comes on the program quite a bit. We talked about the movie The Batman, and the episode is The Batman Has the PTSD was what we called it. If anyone wants to go back in the archives, the archival episodes, if you want to hear that, we talk about a lot about how Batman is not real healthy. And I've talked a lot about on the show how, speaking of trauma, I mean, a lot of superheroes in fictional canon, if they had just gone, if they had gone to therapy instead of developing a costume persona, then there would be no Batman, right? If it would be like, well, some EMDR and, Bruce Wayne's a well-adjusted millionaire, I guess. Which would be, arguably, we could decide whether or not that would make him less of a hero, more of a villain. Who knows? But it just depends how that would work out. But it's the role that mental illness plays, particularly in the Batman canon, though. I think nowadays you're seeing a lot more of that. The MCU has tried to bring in some things. Obviously, they've got Moon Knight, who has dissociative identity disorder. They've got and they did pay some attention to trauma throughout the Avengers, throughout several of the major phases, all the way up through Endgame. That was kind of a Robert Downey Jr.'s Tony Stark's, his character of Tony Stark was driven by, had some PTSD symptoms, and also was driven by to make irrational decisions in Age of Ultron, things like that, based off trauma. And so I think they're getting better at it. But I feel like Batman has been steeped in mental health lore forever. I think that's always been a thing,
I mean, all of his villains come out of a psychiatric facility. So, yes.
Right, that's the main place they're housed when he catches them. It's true. Yeah, you're right. There's not really any major rogues that are just like, well, he's just going to the regular jail. Do we even have one in Gotham? No, we don't need one. Everybody's very traumatized.
It's always the ethnically stereotyped gangsters. They go to jail. They go to prison.
The Italian mob, basically.
Yeah, right. But the the main supervillains they're all crazy, and they of course they always talk about rehabilitation, but it's interesting because some of the depictions of Arkham Asylum, and then I think they've updated it since, and now it's like Arkham Hospital or something. They changed the name because Asylum is not really a current terminology.
But I don't think they've changed much of the aesthetic, which
exactly
is all of the worst things you associate with the word
nasty
asylum.
Haunted house with broken windows and
water dripping in a hallway for no reason.
Right. And the depiction is that it's a abusive environment. So I don't know if it was intentional, but it shows, first of all, that obviously they can't keep a good hold on their patient. They can't keep them in the building, but the revolving door of
it's like how
Arkham
you see
Asylum.
in a cop show, and they'll be like, "Oh, I'll be back on the street by dinner time." Except this way, it's like, no, they'll try to keep me, but I'll still be back on the street.
Just leave. And then I think the Joker broke out one time on a rocket that he put in the bottom of a Christmas tree. But speaking of Christmas special, but anyway,
you've got a security problem if you got that in there.
So, but there's that main hallway shot that they've recreated in several different iterations of Batman, where it's like a fucking, excuse me, I can't swear on this podcast. It's like a big zoo, like where you walk down the hallway and there's these plexiglass rooms and you're looking through the window at each of these characters, and for some reason they let them keep their costumes sometimes.
They often have costumes.
And it depends on different
artists or different things, but
depiction.
Animated series, I think they do. Yeah,
it's like I walk through. There's these plexiglass like enclosures, and they're in there doing their crazy thing. So I would say, at least initially, the depiction of the mentally ill in Batman would not get a super good grade from me.
Well, and that's the thing. It's interesting how they work things in. They try to work in like, mental health is a fascinating thing, and even though I am a fan of this man, you could also throw M. Night Shyamalan in here too, who he said before his mother's a psychologist, and look, his most famous movie, the main character is a psychologist, right? And there's a lot of mental health stuff that he works in. It's a Sixth Sense, everybody, just in case anyone wants to challenge me. I'm not saying it's his best movie. It's definitely the best well known. I think I can say that safely. So
it is a movie. Yeah, I'll give him that.
It is. Wow. Did we just uncover another episode we have to do? I thought most people like The Sixth Sense, but
no, it's a fine movie. All
right,
it's fine.
That's okay. We're gonna have to have
we could have a whole M. Night Shyamalan episode.
Oh, maybe we should. Twist ending. We'll argue about it. Apparently, no. I like M. Night Shyamalan, but I will say this: his use of mental health as a cool thing to throw into dark, scary stories also crosses that line that you're describing, which is like, okay, mental illness is not here just for us to be like, ooh, fun, evil. It's like, okay. And at some level, are there hurtful stereotypes? Now with Batman, they have, I guess, the defensibility of saying, I don't know, are we giving, a real good representation to Killer Croc? I mean, they can hide behind the fantastical elements, I think. But yeah, no, let's get into, let's, so the depiction is not, I think, absolutely very healthy a lot of times. It's funny to see that and to see how they're trying to do that. Now, I guess we should start with the Joker. Why not? I mean, he's very well known. We can dispense with him and then move into some of the others. But he's
I will
one who's
say
usually thought of as crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we should talk about the Joker. But I will say though that the insight, obviously, Batman was originated a long time ago. The idea that someone is criminally insane and therefore could seek rehabilitation for what is a mental illness rather than just being thrown in jail. That's kind of progressive for, something that originated in the 40s.
I think you're absolutely right, because we're talking like a 90-year-old property here, right? At that point.
Right.
And it is funny how some things, and with everything existing at once nowadays, with everything being, you can stream whatever and see everything. Sometimes the problem is that we don't stop and look at that. And I'm not a big, it was a different time. I mean, I think we got to be careful with that.
Yeah.
However, it's also not untrue. That's the part of I think we have to be careful on both sides of that claim.
Right. But which things from the original property are we perpetuating in the current property? Yeah, that's what sometimes becomes the problem.
Yeah,
and with the Joker specifically, and are we talking about the Joker from the comics or Joker the movie? That's a whole different. I think we could do it's entirely separate
thing on Joker,
thing on that stupid movie. Excuse me.
I did not see it for the reasons that you probably didn't like it.
Don't go.
Yeah, it didn't hook my attention. And then I started. It was interested that it existed enough to read about. I read the plot, read spoilers, watched some. So I've read a lot about it, but I just was like, I know I won't enjoy this. Yeah.
Well, because in that movie, and I'll keep this really short, he was not mentally ill. He was just a terrible person. And the Joker has always been crazy and, unpredictably nuts.
Yeah.
Off the rails.
Right.
And like in that movie, he wasn't. He was just a really bad person.
And that's, I think,
who killed his own mother.
Right. Yeah, that's the thing you try to get into, and not in a cool Norman Bates way. No, just kidding. But actually, I'm not sure if Norman Bates killed his mother.
He was just a bad, there's all these things wrong with him, but he wasn't like the Joker usually is.
And I feel like with that, one of the tricky bits is if you're trying to humanize, and I guess the reason I didn't see Joker was because I felt like it was trying to co-opt what I feel is a very important some very important social issues like disenfranchisement and lack of access to treatment and all these things. And, everybody tells you to stop being crazy.
Yeah.
And if I could stop being crazy, I wouldn't be crazy, or whatever that famous line is that people always say. But I'm like, but at the same time, they're turning it into some kind of superpower, being disenfranchised, and it just felt very incel-y to me.
It was incel, and it was
the poster.
The whole thing was icky, and I think people thought it was like profound somehow, that it was art that was like made you think, didn't it? But because you're seeing it from the Joker's perspective. But like anytime you use mass murder as a tool, I think you lose the right to become a sympathetic character. It's
right.
like
so
there's an extent to where I'm like, okay, but anyway,
absolutely.
Even if you don't. Whiny white guys who can't get laid, I don't think that qualifies as a mental illness.
Right. We get right down to I didn't get that job. I have the right to destroy Gotham City now. Right. It's like Brent Kavanaugh as the Joker. Anyway, so the way that you see it play out,
the mainstream Joker.
Yes, with the main Joker. That's what I was trying to get to. There's kind of a couple different ways that they show the Joker. I think you've got, and I think I don't think it was invented by the movie The Dark Knight, but it was popularized by the movie The Dark Knight, was the Joker that we see a little bit more modern. Maybe the Dark Knight Returns comic, Frank Miller and that. Basically, the darker Joker, who is an unhinged, chaotic serial killer with essentially no backstory. We don't know who he is. We don't know much about him. There's a lot of variation. And then, of course, you've got the multiple other people. Jack Napier was one name. I can't remember if that's the name that was in the Batman movie with Jack Nicholson. It was Jack something. But they've had a couple different names. That the Joker has
Joe... something.
Joe Chill, but that's usually
Joe Chill.
Oh, wait, they crossed Jack with Joe Chill in that movie. Joe Chill's the guy who killed Batman's parents. He isn't usually the Joker, and the Joker isn't generally the one who killed Batman's parents. That was in the Tim Burton movie.
That was just the Tim Burton movies. Yeah.
In fact, there's I'm going to mention a little bit here, something interesting. Joe Chill usually is just a normal guy who Batman helped get, or he was apprehended and is wasting away in prison somewhere in the Batman universe, or is posthumous.
Right.
That's the point. There's a real interesting, I did a whole episode on the three Jokers. So we'll talk, I'll just say, Joe Chill in that story, it was very interesting where the Joker actually orchestrates a sort of forgiveness reunion thing with Joe Chill for Batman, to where Batman heals this relationship and Batman's able to let it go and realize here's this sad old man who's dying of cancer in prison. And he's been writing these journals for years and letters that he didn't have the courage to send to the boy that he orphaned, and how sorry he is and how he's tortured by it. And they have this kind of like, Bruce Wayne comes and sits by his bedside before he dies. And it's all because the Joker forces Batman into a situation where he finds these letters, and he does it, as it turns out, not for compassionate reasons, but because he doesn't want Batman to be otherwise occupied with hatred for anyone else in his life other than him.
Nice. There you go.
So there you go.
See, that sounds like something the Joker would do. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Because his particular and his obsession with Batman is a huge part of his character eventually.
Yes, that's one of the things that you see here is that we have that the Joker doesn't really match. I don't know that he neatly matches into any kind of type of real diagnostics. And this is where you get into, if you're looking at from a criminal perspective, criminally insane is someone who is unable to tell the difference between right and wrong. But then you have somebody who, but that doesn't mean that that's the definition of being mentally healthy or mentally unhealthy, right? And this also touches on a trend. I think there's an interesting trend these days. On one hand, I really like it, which is making stories from different characters' points of view. But the downside of that is people make a mistake, and sometimes it's the filmmakers who make this mistake, and sometimes it's the fans, whatever, who will say that, if we attribute everything in the context of mental health and trauma, then we are excusing it, right? But that's the thing. I think that's another form of that's another form of bias, because then what were we saying? Someone with mental illness can't be evil. I mean, that might sound funny,
right.
But does the Joker have to be a murderer, or is he someone who is insane and likes murder?
And a murderer, yeah, exactly.
Right. And that's that's a tricky type of thing to try to hash out of his real person, obviously.
It freaks people out when they learn this, but like, just because you are a sociopath or a psychopath, it doesn't mean that you are violent. There are people who have just regular jobs who have no moral compass.
Right, exactly. They
don't
may be manipulative
it in a violent way,
or whatever, but yeah, exactly. Most of them aren't, you don't have most of them out there committing, murders or doing huge crimes or whatever. In fact, usually it's just that person, it can, in an extreme way, you're going to see them be abusive and do those kinds of things. But there's plenty of people out there who are manipulative, maybe even narcissistic, without maybe being full-blown, or even full-blown narcissistic, but have learned to fit into a lifestyle that supports that for them, Yeah.
Oh, exactly. And they don't even kidnap, commissioners and mayors and put them in a giant Jack in the Box. So. Who out there knows who your police commissioner is in your town? It would be interesting. If you live in Gotham, you definitely know. Or that town, whatever the town the commish lived in. But I was going to say, with the Joker killing Batman's parents, or every variation of making that event more important than it was in the story in the comics, takes away from Bruce Wayne's trauma, in my opinion, because the whole point was it was this nobody who killed his parents for no reason,
Absolutely.
And
yes.
So when you turn Bruce's dad into this political person, or like some hero who saved Gotham City, or like all this lore that you tack on to Bruce Wayne's father, and so therefore he was assassinated for that. that it removes the randomness and the thing that really gnaws at Bruce, which is there's all these criminals out there and anybody could be victimized at any time.
And that's the thing he's
you know,
trying to prevent for others, not right, exactly, not a retribution for his parents so much.
Yeah, it's like once you find out it was predestined or it was, orchestrated for some greater reason, it really kind of takes a poo on Bruce's whole narrative there. It's like, and speaking of which, do you watch the Harley Quinn show? The Harley Quinn cartoon.
Yeah, I've seen some of those. But
the episode where Harley, who is a psychiatrist, has to go into Bruce Wayne's mind and help him confront the memory of his parents' death. You should watch it. It's a lot of what we're talking about, but in a completely far out farcical way.
Harley Quinn's a good one to talk about too, as well as of course, the other fun thing about comic books is the names people have. Like, when you find out, and they do a good job nowadays of poking fun at some of these things where they're like, oh, Doctor Strange, it's your made up name. No, it's a real name. When you see in the movies and things. But her name was Dr. Harleen Quinzel, which then she falls in love with an insane clown and becomes Harley Quinn. Very clever. Why didn't I always go by this? I don't know why more of them don't say that when they pick their persona, but also one of the characters who came from Batman the Animated Series. And I will say, if we look at problematic depictions, the really interesting thing is the evolution of Harley Quinn, of just being at first almost like, in fact, I don't recall when they put the psychiatrist part in there. I think it was in the series, but
it was.
Yeah, so it was pretty early on.
There was a flashback.
Yeah.
So she fell in love with her patient.
Exactly. And the Joker, right? And having the Harley Quinn and the Joker relationship, right? That was there. That's where we've seen some real evolution, because as people identified that as what is it? It's an abusive relationship, obviously, because it's the Joker. Right. And and it grew from, in the animated series, it was kind of started out as this kind of Bonnie and Clyde, they're both nutsy, ha ha ha. And then, of course, it builds on as she comes back into the comics, and then you get some of the darker storylines. And you kind of had this tug of war for years of, are they these star-crossed lovers who are crazy and no one gets us? Or is it basically like a controlling, manipulative, diminutive, physically and mentally
it's an abusive relationship
to her?
Yeah.
Of course, right. Yeah, exactly. That's
explored in the animated series. It's probably been a while since either of us have watched it, but I do remember the episodes where Catwoman and Poison Ivy help Harley get out of the abusive relationship. But that episode arc ends with her going back of her own free will, which is not unrealistic, but it is in the show played for a gag more than I felt like it should have been. It's like people do go back all the time, even when there's extreme measures to get them out.
Sure.
But then they, in the show, it was kind of like, oh gosh, she just went back to the Joker. That crazy kid, And
that's, that is something, like you say, it does happen. And one of the things that I maintain is that not every character has to make healthy choices. In fact, oftentimes the unhealthy choices are the most interesting choices in fiction. But I think, and so I always felt like that is like, as long as it's being depicted as a abusive, unhealthy relationship, I didn't necessarily have a problem with it existing as an abusive relationship, but I thought it was a great choice that the DC universe, I'll say in general, trended towards stories of empowerment for Harley, though, one way or the other. And mostly it's like in the animated Harley Quinn, where I think it starts with them breaking up, if I'm not mistaken, basically.
Yeah, she finally is like, I'm out. And she does. They continue that thing. It's kind of a funny. They imply in that show, even though it's obviously for adults, that it's a sequel to the animated series. So it picks up
Okay.
some of those storylines and continues them, and makes fun of them to a
Right.
great degree. But Poison Ivy and her end up as a couple, and
Yes. Okay.
but
I think I had
it's
read that somewhere too. I'd heard that somewhere too, that they,
yeah,
yeah, and that's reflected in the comics as well. At this point, there have been some comic storylines of them as a couple as well,
yeah.
getting together. So interesting. Okay.
But I think her particular, when they have her get together with Poison Ivy, she's almost as obsessive with that relationship as she was with the Joker, which is a good continuation of
Interesting.
her mental illness, because she becomes obsessively caretakery. She, very much like she latches on to people and wants to take care of them, and not you know what I'm trying to say. There must be some fancy psycho babble for that. But
So she's an overattached, enmeshed kind of person with relationships.
yeah,
is what you're
exactly.
saying.
That sounds good. Yeah.
I no, that's really interesting too, because once again the crazy, exciting, sexy symptom of mental illness is the one that makes you go murder people, the one that doesn't actually reflect in the real world, as far as
Right,
that goes.
exactly.
Not to say that nobody, obviously people who are violent and murder people have mental illness issues. However, they've done study after study after study about how those with mental illness are much less likely to harm you physically than people who are not diagnosable with mental illness. Basically,
Yeah.
So
That makes sense.
no.
And that sort of leads to another problem I have with the depiction of mental illness in the Batman world, which is that because someone is a criminal, they're insane. And you go to like Poison Ivy or Catwoman. Catwoman ends up in Arkham all the time, and I'm like, she's not crazy. She's a burglar. She
Yes.
just wants to steal stuff. She likes shiny things.
Right.
Like, I mean, I guess dressing up like a cat is kind of crazy, but like, I don't think it justifies her being rehabilitated as criminally insane. I think she's just a petty, she's just a thief.
She's a and not, I wouldn't say always petty. She's a high end.
No, not petty. Yeah.
Right? And also
Yeah.
somebody with
The really good thief.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've seen Catwoman really has shifted over the years to become a full anti-hero now, to where it's like, yeah, she's kind of like morally flexible and in it for herself. But then, and in this last depiction, Matt Reeves, the Batman, which I loved that version of Catwoman too. She was really more of a vigilante almost. And yeah, she wasn't going to
absolutely
turn her nose up at a paycheck, but she was motivated by some other desires, even if it was vengeance or whatever, that weren't maybe the noblest of motivators. She wasn't just stealing things, So
yeah, and she clearly has a moral compass.
Exactly.
Where a lot of the other characters don't.
It's an interesting thing to see. I'll tell you one of the things about the mental illness when it comes to Catwoman. You're absolutely right. She doesn't really belong in Arkham. The cat attributes or cattributes that she embraces, and the costuming and the that you could just chalk that up to branding in that universe. If you're going to be
that's
in
true.
supervillain game,
apparently everybody has a costume persona.
Right, yeah, you got to have a thing. That's just how they get into that. It's sort of like being a TikTok influencer in our world, except with crime. Right. You got to find a way to stand out.
You know how a lot of people who do a lot of cosplay, they have relationships with people who make the costumes, right? The talented artisans who can actually produce that stuff.
Oh yeah,
but those guys must have a lot of work in Gotham City. It's like everyone who wants to do anything is getting themselves some sort of costume.
They actually address that in the Marvel world. If you've ever watched like She-Hulk, there's a whole plot line about somebody who designs. It's kind of the Ed Momo of the Incredibles, but there's a whole plot line about that of like, Yeah.
That's
Anyway,
funny.
Daredevil shows up on the wrong coast and is doing something, and he's there as a lawyer ostensibly, but then he shows up in his costume and She-Hulk, and he fights somebody. And at some point, she's like, "What are you doing here?" And he's just like, "Well, I also had to see the person that you get your costume from.
Go to my costumer.
They make my suit for me, or whatever."
That's
something
amazing.
like that's how he knew the person. And poking fun at that infrastructure that would have to exist is something that they have gotten quite good at in the MCU.
Yeah.
But it's the things that you will see where they all get lumped in together to this idea that you just said, which is if you're a criminal, you must be crazy. And you're absolutely right. It's like they have in Gotham, you kind of have the supervillains, and then you have the mobsters, like you said. And there's some crossover. In some versions, the Joker used to be a mobster. He's a heavy hitter with the mobsters. The Penguin might be a good one to look at here, who's right in between those two in the way that he's portrayed. And once again, more comics and more old school Penguin is, got robot penguins delivering bombs throughout the city, and he's got a machine gun hidden in his umbrella, and he's basically got some panache and flair. A more modern Penguin in a lot of depictions is just basically he's a thug, he's a gangster,
crime boss,
crime boss, and so there's always been a bit of both there. One thing that I thought was interesting is that in the Batman, the most recent movie, I thought it was interesting how they gave a little nod to someone, because so you got someone like Falcone, who's the mobster, and then you've got someone like the Riddler, who clearly is the Rogues Gallery. Rogues Gallery is the unhinged chaos people.
Right.
At one point, you've got Oswald Cobblepot, who's both. During that iconic, famous car chase where he's driving right before he flips over the car and everything, while that's happening, one of the things I noticed about him is in the way that, I don't know if this was direction from Reeves or if it was Colin Farrell's decision, but he's laughing. Like throughout the thing, he does the little crazy laugh that Batman villains sometimes do, where he's like, "Oh, I got him! Oh, he's here!" And he's kind of laughing even as he's being forced into the wreckage.
Right.
There's this little part, this unhinged part of him that at that extreme moment starts to become a Rogues Gallery member instead of just a mobster member. Anyway, well, that's just how I over obsessed on it. So that's an interesting crossover line there. Yeah.
No, you're right. I think he's the crime bot. He's the closest to reality, and that was seen in the animated show, and I think a lot of the comics too, where he's often the one of the super villains, the Rogues Gallery crazy guys, who's the closest into reality, and he becomes sort of the mouthpiece. Yeah, right, exactly. If they want to organize something, like whenever any of the baddies come together and they want to organize something, they always get Penguin as the front man because he actually knows how to work with people. And,
he's plugged into the mobster world in a way that, like, I would just say it doesn't seem like Bane is not exactly, or Clayface is not, right?
But Poison Ivy is another one who I don't think she belongs in Arkham because she's an environmental terrorist, and yes, she has augmented aspects to her, whatever. She has superpowers, but I don't think she's crazy.
Right. Her mental, she seems to play by her own moral compass, which and this is where we also get into is this a person, who does things like with antisocial tendencies, or is this a person whose decisions are all governed by antisocial personality disorder or something like that, which, by the way, also does not negate their ability to make choices and everything too. I like to, I'm just emphasizing that all throughout here. And yeah, you're right. Exactly. Eco-terrorist. She does what she thinks is right. Now, there's a moral flexibility around the issue of who and when she kills people, generally speaking, that most people wouldn't have. But once again, would we say it's not insanity in the sense that she knows it's not societally approved or whatever, right? Two-Face.
Well, she's definitely a murderer.
Oh, exactly. Right. Exactly.
But
you know, but you
that doesn't make her crazy.
And it's not that, once again, it's not that she doesn't have trauma like a lot of them do, right? But yeah, a little harder. Now, we have to mention Harvey, right? Two-Face is a really, I don't know, really interesting character. At the same time, and someone who, I guess you could say, he mixes it up with the mobsters too, but he scares them. He doesn't live long enough in the movie world, but in the comics, he's a pretty integrated part of Gotham's crime force, and he has thugs that work for him and stuff, and all that. But yeah, you know, here's a guy who had traditionally, I mean, the movie that he's in, you know, that has a little different, but acid sprayed in his face while prosecuting someone in court, and then becomes this, like, especially because it neatly divided exactly down his face how the injury happened. And apparently the rest of his body at some point turns that color, or something is blue, you know, usually whatever color, blue or red usually is depicted. But so, you know, he becomes this divided guy, obviously, and he flips the coin. The coin flip is one of the most, I'll be honest, it's a very fascinating use of mental illness driven behavior in fiction, I think, is the flipping coin with Two-Face. It's a very interesting visual thing.
Because of his psychosis, he has to honor it.
Yes.
Like, that's the depiction, you know, when he sees if it's good heads or bad heads, he has to honor the results.
Right.
And that, I will say, I love Chris Nolan's movies. That was the one character that I thought did not get justice in those movies. And I don't know if they didn't even read the source material, but like the backstory and the development of that character into Two-Face didn't work for me in the movie, because it's actually really interesting in the comics and in the animated series as well, where he had mental illness already.
Yes.
And when the trauma came, but like, he could not make decisions, and he had this sort of dark side to him that he had repressed. And then when he had the trauma, he lost the inhibition to keep all of that under control. And that was, I think, along with the coin toss, you know, he's one of the more realistic crazy guys in Batman. Did you ever see the comic? I think we read it together a long time ago. Janus, where he started fighting crime under a separate persona.
Yes.
With the two-headed mask.
Right.
And everyone was like, who's this new vigilante? And then it turned out to be Two-Face, but Two-Face didn't know he was doing it. Because it was like a dissociative thing, but the good side of him was trying to come out.
That's the thing.
I thought that was fascinating.
They've done some really interesting things with the good versus bad side. And I think Nolan did take a stab at that, because if you watch that movie, it's interesting to watch how many times Commissioner Gordon and Batman try to shepherd, but they almost don't notice that they're having to keep Harvey on track. Like when he threatens to shoot the guy.
Yeah. So he loses his temper a lot, but I don't think that's the same thing. Yeah.
I think that, no. And ultimately Nolan decided to take it a little bit different way, I think, but because it gets down to where basically all the sacrifices that he was proudly rushing towards, he was not prepared to make, whereas Bruce Wayne definitely was prepared and made these exact same sacrifices, except made them by choice instead of having his life taken from him. So I am with you, though. I think that there was, and I know that for the greater arc, they needed to have him die, blah, blah, blah. But I think by having him die so soon into his existence, as is often the case in superhero movies, we want to have some closure, and so we kill off characters instead of having them be around for decades like they do in the comics. And there's all these interesting things they do with Two-Face, which is, like you said, good side versus bad side, the indecisiveness. And if anybody is interested in, if you want to read what should probably be called The Origin of Two-Face, go and read Batman, The Long Halloween. If you've ever read that one, it's
really good.
Yeah, it's one, and it is really, really showcases what you just said as far as what.
You want to talk about mental illness?
Yeah.
That by the time you're done reading that comic, you will be mentally ill.
Daryl
It's really
Mansell, Daryl Mansell, who comes on, is coming on my program sometimes and runs the Paprika Network. They did a whole year where they broke down each issue, because what it was originally it was an issue that came out every holiday for a whole year from one Halloween to the next, and now it's sold as a bound, like most comics. You can buy the run as a single book, graphic novel style, and people should check that out. It's like basically the origin of Two-Face, and it has some crazy little bents for other people in there too, about tracking a serial killer who only kills Gotham's crime family members and only does it on holidays. And so the holiday killer, as they call them, is who they're trying to catch. And throughout the whole time, you're wondering, because it's essentially, and I think it's where Christopher Nolan took the dynamic of Commissioner Gordon, Batman, and Harvey Dent all working together, right?
Right.
Because they work together. But at some point, both Commissioner Gordon and Batman start being like, this is weird dark side. Harvey keeps showing up with Harvey's not against these murders exactly. Or did he do them? What happened? And I won't spoil it I'll spoil it in some other podcast where I talk about it, but whether or not Harvey really is the killer, the answer might surprise you. Anyway, hopefully it was designed to surprise you. That's how whodunits work.
I didn't even agree with the casting, and that's the one thing in that movie that is a bug for me is
Aaron
Two-Face.
Eckhart of the Core?
Yeah. I just don't think he had the reign. I loved him in Thank You for Smoking, but I don't think he had the evil side. He's too much the nice, good-looking blonde ex-Mormon guy, But the
already
he didn't. I couldn't really. Once he was doing the bad guy voice, I just didn't. It didn't work for me.
That's interesting. I didn't. He didn't bug me in the role as much as you. I did have the thought about, oh man, we're not going to be more Two-Face. As you said, that ties in a little with.
And you can't beat. What's his name? Oh no, sorry.
Polka Dot Man.
I was going to make up a Batman and Robin reference. The old movies. What's his name? The guy from Men in Black.
Tommy Lee Jones.
Played Tommy Lee Jones. You can't beat Tommy Lee Jones' performance. His Academy Award-winning performance as
Two-Face. That's right. I forgot that existed for a moment until you reminded me. Thanks a lot.
That movie was off the rails.
Crazy.
Speaking of mental illness, no, I think that was more drug-induced. That entire film. You
know what that was? That was Tommy Lee Jones attempting to portray Two-Face as if Cesar Romero were playing the Joker in the way he did in the 1960s.
Exactly.
And I think, it was like that was his only exposure to Batman, which, you know what? Actually, as I say that out loud, is quite possible that was Tommy Lee Jones's only exposure to Batman. Don't know this for sure, but it definitely could have been. Oh, yeah, that old show. I remember. That'd be fun. Yeah,
this is a huge paycheck, so I'm good.
Exactly.
I will laugh when you want me to laugh.
Yeah, so he was admirably swinging for the fences with that exact type of performance. So when I watched that, I was like, this is just the old movie. Just a modern version of the old movie. I mean, anywhere where I believe that's the same one where they have the joke, "Holy Rusted Metal," Batman. If I'm not mistaken, Chris O'Donnell says "Holy Rusted Metal," and he's like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "That building, it's rusted. There's holes in this side of the building." And I almost expected Val Kilmer to smack him and just say, "Knock it off, Chris O'Donnell."
George Clooney. That was the George Clooney one.
Is that the George Clooney one? I got those mixed up. Which one, Val Kilmer? Anyway, whatever. I thought Tommy Lee Jones was in the Val Kilmer one, but I think you're right.
Oh, I think you're right. Batman Forever.
Those are both really not very good, as it turns out.
Gosh. Batman Forever was the Jim Carrey, Tommy Lee Jones. Oh, my goodness. I was thinking Batman and Robin with Arnold Schwarzenegger.
But you know what? The dumb joke I said might have come from that one, actually. I'm not sure. Chris O'Donnell was in both of them as Robin, actually.
He was, yeah.
Yeah.
He was.
They had a lot of weird crossover with people.
And Michelle Pfeiffer, right?
Michelle Pfeiffer was Cat. No, she was Catwoman in the
as
old Tim Burton one.
Batgirl. Oh, Alicia Silverstone. Sorry.
Yeah,
Alicia Silverstone as Batgirl.
And Uma Thurman, I think, is Poison Ivy. Haha, there we go.
Yeah.
And somebody is Bane, but he's big cartoony Bane.
Oh, really? I missed that. I haven't seen it in a while.
Do you want to? I wanted to mention Jason Todd.
Oh,
who is former Robin, murdered by the Joker, kind of, and then brought back to life, kind of, when Superboy punched the universe. We won't have to get into that, but that's the fun part of Batman.
Is that the Red Hood?
The Red Hood
storyline.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Jason Todd becomes the Red Hood, who, as a mantle, so to speak, or a hood that has fallen on several people. In fact, I think the Joker was even the Red Hood for a minute. But I'm sure it's one of those things that in Gotham they're like, oh yeah, who's the Red Hood? Jason Todd, wasn't it the Joker once? Nah, no.
Who's the Red Hood at this
probably
point?
Not. Yeah, but Jason Todd has been the main Red Hood for most of the hoodness, I think, and basically a very violent vigilante who uses all of Batman's tactics except with murder added into them, and so the idea being that his trauma and his brain was kind of fractured through being murdered by the Joker.
I mean, he was literally beaten with a crowbar, so I feel he has some brain damage. This might have.
And I don't know, because there's a little wrinkle in these that the fantastical elements, the fact that he actually died and then was brought back by Superboy punching the universe in another comic.
Oh, really?
I think.
Okay.
There was some.
I don't remember that.
I can't remember if it was the Crisis Saga or there was something that magicked a bunch of stuff, and for some reason, that's where.
So why does he have trauma if he came back?
He still remembers it. Memory is pretty key to trauma.
That's true. You remember getting beaten to death by a crowbar. That's pretty.
Christian's like, get over it, Jason. Come on.
I did think it was kind of when he came back. I guess it's still. At first, I was thinking, does this invalidate because after that, Batman didn't want to have another Robin. There was he experienced trauma from Jason Todd getting beaten to death, and was like, no more Robins
for a while.
Which and then eventually he was like, I guess it's okay to have children come and fight crime with me again. But
sort of a child soldiering, sort of a recurring theme in superhero stories, unfortunately.
Right.
Yeah.
But now that I think about it, I guess it doesn't invalidate that because he did actually die. I think that was the part of the story that I forgot, because if he came back from the dead, that's
it was
an
inconvenient wrinkle when they decided to bring him back that he actually had objectively been beaten to death by a crowbar in the Batman world, which is, a little more realistic sometimes. This is actually the issue with Batman being part of the greater DC. That's a whole nother, I don't want to, but it's fun to have him tag along with the Justice League. But then when it's but then when he's over in Gotham, we can't pretend that magic doesn't exist. Right.
Right. That's true. That is a good point.
That's a bit tricky.
It's every once, Batman has the resources and connections to help save the planet, but for some reason he's still beating people up in Gotham City on the streets every night. Man, dude.
It's funny. He's kind of held onto that longer than a lot of heroes, because I feel I don't know. A lot of them you get right to the intergalactic level of fighting and things like that in Marvel, and you don't see Iron Man stopping muggings. But then you do see Spider-Man doing that. So Spider-Man and Batman they go back to their roots every now and then.
Yeah, they're still the vigilantes.
Yeah.
Superman used to be much more, I'm going to punch the bad guy. Before they realized that if you have an invincible superhuman being, alien person, that they should probably be fighting people other than the guy who grabbed the woman's purse. But
right, exactly.
Or who kidnapped Lois Lane this week,
or flipped off Jimmy Olsen or whatever. Yeah. One of my
Oh,
favorite
Jimmy.
One of my favorite tweets of all time was somebody who tweeted and said that Jimmy Olsen thinks he has he only has two real friends, Superman and Clark Kent. It's like, hey, guess what, stupid? You only have one friend.
I love it.
So let me say, I know that we're probably up on time for today. Do you want to do that? Do you want to do like more of this another time? We can look at more.
Yeah, we
different
can.
villains.
To be continued.
Yeah.
For sure.
We can
Because I think there's some. We didn't get to talk about the Riddler yet, which I think is an interesting one, especially given the new depiction of him in the Batman films. So
that's it.
Yeah,
Maybe let's start with him next time. Let's get into it because
another set.
Yeah, they've made him much more Joker-like in some ways, and then anyway, we'll get into that. That'd be fun. We should do that. So, okay, well, thank you. I'll patch up this one here, and then we'll have another one we'll do next week or something or sometime.
Cool. I'm imagining outro music, so I guess we're done.
Hang on.
Thank you for listening to the Court and Parts Podcast Network. To listen to more Court and Parts shows, visit courtandarts.com.